One of the 5 Game of Thrones prequels in development is way further ahead of the others. Jane Goldman's show about the Long Night already has some actors cast and is ready to shoot the pilot test episode. So we know around 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, a period called the Long Night happened in this world. But now, George Martin recently came out and said the spin-off will be taking place close to 5,000 years before the start of Game of Thrones. The 8,000 to 10,000 year range was just an inaccurate date passed down from word of mouth in the story, since this was before the time of writing. What makes this spin-off problematic, or any prequel troubling, is we already know way too much about it. If we already know the ending, there won't be much suspense or build up for the climactic battle. But I think it's easy to look past this, because there's a lot of entertainment in a story to be shared. Just look at how successful book adaptations of stories like The Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, or even the A Song of Ice and Fire series becoming Game of Thrones are. These are some of the biggest on-screen franchises in all of entertainment. A lot of people still paid to watch something they already read. The real problem with the Long Night prequel, that the other possible spin-offs won't have, is it's very similar to the original Game of Thrones show. The stories are very cyclical. The whole Prince That Was Promised prophecy is based on what happened during the Long Night. When history's worst winter hit, covering the world in a generation-long darkness, a race of ice creatures called the Others, or White Walkers, came down from the lands of always winter. This was before the wall was ever built, so they didn't have much trouble making it down south. The First Men and Children of the Forest just recently ended their 2,000-year war and made peace, so together they fought against the White Walkers. We don't know if the Night King is a character in the books yet, but in the show, the first White Walkers and the leader of the Dead Army was created by the Children of the Forest, since they were losing the war against the First Men. So I guess in the show, they created the Night King, he ran off to the lands of always winter without helping in the war. The Children of the Forest and the First Men made peace, and then the Night King finally decided to attack both of them. Or maybe they'll just not include the part where the Children and the First Men made peace, and the Night King went on a killing spree right after he was created. It seemed like they waited for the perfect winter to strike, since they only appeared to come at night. The sun might affect them somehow, but I think this only applies in the books. Since the Long Night gave them a generation-long winter covered in darkness, there was no better time to go south. People were already freezing and starving to death, especially in the north. With a winter this long, fall harvests would run out. Vegetation and wildlife to hunt would soon become scarce. It would be difficult to fight in these conditions, starving with brutal weather. Regular winters are already so bad in the north that in some places, older men pretty much kill themselves so they aren't a burden on their families. This would give their loved ones a better chance at survival with more food rations to go around. They say they're going hunting, but it's not likely they'll ever make it back home. I guess it would be pretty interesting to see how they handle the hero's character in the Long Night. The Red Priest of the Lord of Light believe a chosen warrior defeated evil and darkness in the Long Night. He used a legendary sword called Lightbringer that he created by thrusting a blade into his wife's chest, killing her, and combining her soul to his sword. Lightbringer was a fire sword that burst the White Walkers into flames. The Northerners share a slightly different story, however. They remember a man they called the Last Hero, who fought alongside the Children and discovered dragonglass was the White Walkers' weakness. After this discovery, the first members of the Night's Watch was formed and forced the White Walkers to retreat to the lands of always winter. This sounds a lot like Jon and his Valyrian steel sword Longclaw, or possibly Daenerys and her fire weapon Drogon, depending on who you believe will defeat the Night King. But all around this fantasy world, there are stories of a hero with a different name, with a slightly different story, but all occurred during a period in the Long Night. What'll separate the Long Night prequel from Game of Thrones will probably be the emphasis on the White Walkers, and the circumstances surrounding the main character. White Walkers were always the background threat in Game of Thrones for years, while the Lords of Westeros fought amongst themselves for the crown. It wasn't until Season 5, Episode 8 that we got a proper introduction of what humanity was up against at the Massacre of Hardhome. In the show's description, there was mention of some Starks. House Stark was founded around this same time by the legendary Bran the Builder. He supposedly was a man behind the wall's construction, as well as Winterfell and some other notable structures throughout Westeros. If they are going to include any Starks, it's going to have to be him. The Long Night prequel only has a pilot episode ordered for now, so HBO will only put some money in for this show to become a reality if the first episode is good enough. And it also has to beat out the other 3 or 4 shows in early development. This story will have no dragons or dragon riders, but one of the rumored spin-offs should be filled with them. There was a leak a few months ago about Max Bornstein creating a prequel about the doom of Valyria called the Empire of Ash. There really isn't a lot to this story. The most powerful civilization in this series' history suffered a volcanic cataclysm that destroyed everything and everyone there. But maybe it's a good thing that there isn't a lot written about it. The writers will have a lot of creative freedom, meaning it should hopefully be far more original than The Long Night. This was only 400 years before the start of Game of Thrones, so the Targaryens were still around. But they were only one of 40 Dragonlord families of Valyria, and they were considered one of the lesser families. They only escaped the doom because the head of the family's daughter had a prophetic dream and warned her father. So they packed everything and flew over to Dragonstone in Westeros with their 5 dragons. I can see this playing out as a really good first episode. I think the main issue would be the budget. Valyria wasn't like any other city in this world. They were extremely wealthy and powerful, with dragons flying all over the skies, and amazing architecture. Unless they toned down the dragon scenes and just saved the visual effects for only big moments, I'm not sure HBO will risk ordering this prequel. I think if they're gonna have a budget high enough for the Doom of Valyria, I think they might as well make a show about the Dance of Dragons. This was a Targaryen civil war that took place around 150 years before the start of the story. As much as I want to be hopeful about having another writer outside of George Martin come up with a story set in this world, there are already a lot of fleshed out pieces of lore that can be easily adapted into a great show. This civil war gets intense, with dragons and Targaryens killing each other, and all because of one king chose his eldest daughter to succeed him, but the younger brother took the crown for himself. This is of course just a short dumbed down explanation of the complicated story. George Martin wrote an entire novella called The Princess and the Queen about this civil war, so check that out if you want to read this amazing story. I probably sound like I'm just shitting on the Long Night prequel, but I am happy we are getting more of this universe. I do love everything about this franchise, so the more I get, the happier I am. So expect to watch one of these shows in 2020, or maybe a little later than that. With the Game of Thrones final season coming out in 2019, it won't be much of a wait for some more greatness. Just don't expect a show on Robert's Rebellion or the Dunk and Egg short stories, since they've been confirmed to not be one of the prequels in development. Alright, I'm done here. Thanks for watching, guys.